Well, good afternoon, everybody. And let me quickly say thank you to the university for inviting me to this panel, to David Oakley and all the others involved for facilitating and managing the forum, and to the other panelists before me for their deep insights and perspectives. I believe that I come to this panel at the right time as a civilian, as a Foreign Service officer with nearly 20 years overseas, mostly with the United States Agency for International Development. My own insights and perspectives shared today are derived from this experience. They are my own views, not those of the United States Agency for International Development, the Joint Special Operations University, or the United States government. To frame my perspective given the topic at hand, I returned to President Wilson's Back to the Future scene setter, in which he talked about the compound security environment related to converging transnational compound security dilemmas, a growing weakening of nation states, and a weakening of the liberal and international system itself. I'd like to begin by taking 3 questions from the Joint Special Operations University white paper series and propose them here, while taking a civilian lens to thinking about how they might be impacted by intelligence. For the first question, we heard President Wilson propose the following at the onset of this forum, as well as in the white paper series. We may be doing things right, but are we doing the right things? I recall the widely circulated quotation originally from Alcoholics and Narcotics Anonymous texts, often credited to Einstein, that simply say insanity is repeating the same mistakes and expecting different results. I read a Joint Special Operations University monograph recently that used the more visceral adage of a hammer looking for a nail, in the sense that predictability can be a trap when the expectations of a predicted outcome limit the consideration of other options, ideas, or actions that might otherwise detract from success in achieving that prediction. Such predictability lends itself to scientific methodology, where we reduce phenomena to root variables to ascertain cause and effect and accumulate progressive knowledge along those lines, potentially sidestepping a greater appreciation of the context. What happens when our government culture manages challenges of this magnitude in a reductionist linear modality? I echo one of President Wilson's important hypotheses, in that tactical, discrete, sequential approaches to problems could worsen compound security dilemmas and lead to unintended wider conflict. When we look at one political effect on which we can all agree we need in terms of interactions with partner countries or relationships, it's influence, which is necessary to achieve integrated deterrence. But what is in the minds of those partner country collaborators? Do we know what they really want, or do we assume it? Do we know what their people really want? Do we want the same things? Do we know what we really want? What we do see emerging in the multilateral and academic spheres is the concept of human security rising into prominence. The United Nations defines human security as an approach to assist member states in identifying and addressing widespread and cross-cutting challenges to the survival, livelihood, and dignity of their people. It calls for people-centered, comprehensive, context-specific, and prevention-oriented responses that strengthen the protection and empowerment of all people. As our minds open to thinking beyond the nation state in the wake of our 20-year experience in Afghanistan, we can rethink a grander strategy of not just reacting or responding to crises, but changing our mindset to how we adapt to the environment that creates the conditions leading to the conflict to begin with. Thus, it may not be the operation itself that is so critically under review. It may be well upstream of it, and what will the intelligence be used for? So from a more generalized and atmospheric view, we can look at Special Operations Force's 12 core skills, specifically special reconnaissance. What could that information be used for? It may not be how they go about getting it, but for what end and with whom? It's not just special operators who speak local languages, acquire deeper understanding about the environment, and have vast networks of contacts or relationships within the host countries we operate in. The same could be said for civil affairs operations, counterinsurgency activity, and foreign humanitarian assistance in theory. Intelligence could then be adapted, perhaps not so much in content, but in context. Now, for the second question, is the current organization of our people correct to achieve our stated objectives and goals? From our national security and defense strategies to the vast publications from academia and think tanks on security, one bottom line they all share is that the military cannot do it alone, especially in strategic competition. One term that has risen in use and frequency is the Joint Interagency, Intergovernmental, Multilateral plus Commercial Mindset, or JIMC, and how it could be used to think about, respond to, and attempt to mitigate compound security dilemmas. Many of us in foreign assistance agree and have been trying to do similar things within our own JIMC constructs with development stakeholders, many of whom work in conflict and post-conflict environments with explicit peace and security objectives. But on the contrary to what we may believe in principle, what many of us see in practice is akin to a whole of government hashtag of sorts, associated with the latest initiatives that attempt to merely coordinate or at best synchronize the plans and actions of various departments and agencies. The situation lends itself to the insanity principle I mentioned earlier, but more from the visual of bureaucratic inertia that contests anything new based on the amount of time it takes to perform something new on top of what they already are responsible for. And while those intra-agency responsibilities may lead to interim achievements and successes, the interagency equation results in a sum that at best can only be defined by adding up the variables in the equation. What we see in a non-reciprocal conflict equation tends to be factors multiplied rather than merely summed, mostly because so many of the variables are left unaddressed and for so long. Not only do tactical, discrete, sequential approaches to problems potentially worsen compound security dilemmas and lead to unintended wider conflict, but when our thinking continues to be based on government-centric, linear, authority and development models, we're going to continue missing the dynamics that drive the operating environment. Going back to the monograph I mentioned earlier, it concludes in saying doing wrong really right still goes wrong. It asks the question, what if terrorism is actually just a symptom, not really a problem? Organizational failure, it says, more often comes because of what an entity did not do than because of what they did. So let me turn to the final question. Are the processes by which the organization receives and integrates data adequate? I will pause as I show an interesting comic I saw several months ago that so profoundly reinforced the image of various platforms for security in my mind, including human security from our American perspective. Could you please post the slide, please? Okay, so how each persona chooses to engage the tree would drive such processes. In this analogy, one could interpret the upper images and the lower left image as varying degrees of doctor-patient orientation. What can I do to make this tree more useful in this case? A solution with the most economic incentive, or the most functional in terms of utility, or the most practical in terms of development? But the lower right image reinforces the notion that this doctor-patient orientation does not see the tree for what it is and what role it already plays. The doctors are often imposing allopathic remedies into compound security environments where chronic, not acute disease is figuratively manifesting. It's not to say that allopathic medications do not provide some benefit, they do. It's to reinforce this reoccurring theme that quick fixes could end up making the situation worse. And that's not the quick fixes that are wrong per se, but the mentality to hastily use them in reaction to events we see from the outside, rather than devote the time to understand the deeper dynamics within a focus area and focus on modalities that support a country or a region's own ability to resolve them. To loop back to intelligence, it's not about what is given, but further upstream in the form of why and how it's derived. It could be about breaking an inertia within our own mental models and behaviors that we need to figure out in all aspects of our foreign affairs. So to conclude, let me end on a quotation by the famed Irish singer and activist Bono from the band U2, who wrote this lyric back in the early 1980s. We thought that we had the answers. It was the questions we had wrong. Until we better understand our questions, how do we know what intelligence we need and for whom? That's all for my presentation. Thanks.